While we wait for our morality to make us reconsider the lot of animals, laws and rights play a key role in how their status is changing, a status that sometimes leaves a lot to be desired. Piglets with their tails cut off, castrated without anesthesia in front of their mothers that are raging mad. European parliamentarians and representatives of animal rights organizations need to have strong stomachs. On the agenda for this meeting is the well-being of pigs. 95% of all European pigs live in off-the-ground pens where they never see the sun. Tail docking, castration without anesthetic, and tooth filing are permitted in the majority of countries, despite the European Commission having recommended banning these practices years ago.
The Commission doesn't appear to have done what is necessary to make that happen. And I'd like to ask what the reasons for that seeming inactivity are.
We realize there is a problem of enforcement in terms of tail docking, and we are trying to find the best way to address it. We should try to do it by taking everybody on board, and by taking particularly on board the farmers, the ones who will be asked to take measures. Sometimes we should admit also costly measures to implement legislation.
The European Commission representative, who is a specialist in animal well-being, is cautious. Between the interests of farmers in 28 member states and the wishes of animal protection lobbies, the vote is a close one. Pascal Durand, Green MEP, has heard the Commission's delaying tactics 1,000 times before.
I'm not challenging the good faith of those who defend animal well-being at the Commission. This is not about them. The reality is that they have very little sway, and if there isn't a huge amount of support in relation to these subjects, we will continue to raise animals in these improper conditions. And the term improper is a very generous description, so that certain people will make more money. As soon as it involves money, as soon as it involves the lobbies, be it the farming lobby, the livestock breeding lobby, or the industrial lobby, of course there's massive resistance.
The stakes are huge, because in terms of well-being, it is the European Commission that sets the standards. For MEPs who support animal rights, these regulations are too few and too lax, and above all, are very badly and unevenly enforced by the various member states due to a lack of sufficient checks. When they want the Commission to go further, they are soon brought back to reality. This is what happened when in November 2015, they wanted to question the Commission on the lack of new targets.
We spreken nu over dierenwelzijn. Maar het zou eigenlijk moeten gaan over mensenwelzijn. Vluchtelingen laten we in Europa uren in de kou lopen. Daarbij denk ik aan ouderen en kleine kinderen. Terwijl dieren in transport, verwarming, ventilatie en drinken hebben. Laten we aan de slag gaan met het agendapunt van vandaag. Laten we de mensen helpen en oplossingen zoeken voor de echte crisis in Europa.
Every time we want to ask questions about animal welfare, they raise other urgent issues. But of course, there's unemployment. Of course, there are people living in unbearable conditions. We see that with refugees and with a great number of other subjects. But that takes nothing away from it. Just because there are people suffering, it doesn't mean animals should suffer too. The reality is that there is no such thing as the other thing. Everything is connected. It's about solidarity. It's about our relationship to suffering, our relationships to others, to nature, to living creatures.
In order to combine animal protection with that of humans, in the Netherlands, some animal rights activists have taken a radical decision: to move into politics, with the first political party for animals. On the 8th of March 2015, the day of the provincial elections, the founder and president of the Animal Party, Marianne Timur, is waiting for the results. The Animal Party goes from 7 to 18 seats in the provinces.
Hartelijk dank en heel veel succes. Yes.
Thanks to proportional representation, it has carved out a place in the Dutch political landscape.
When I started the Party for the Animals, a lot of people thought, what's next, a party for plants? And they really were making fun of the party. But as every social movement goes through the same phase, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they want to fight you, and then you win. And we won in 2006. For the first time ever in the world, the Party for the Animals won 2 seats in the national parliament. For the first time ever, there was a party for non-humans.
At the last legislative elections, the Animal Party held on to its 2 seats with 1.9% of the vote. In 2014, it sent 1 MEP to Brussels. Marianne Thieme doesn't claim to be on the left or the right, instead presenting her party as one of compassion and sustainability.
Economische groei als de oplossing voor alle problemen, terwijl wij de enige partij zijn die zegt nee, economische groei is niet de oplossing, maar het is het probleem. If we really want to change the world into a more sustainable planet, then we have to look after the most vulnerable beings on Earth, the animals. We can change the behavior of humans. And we can do that also by law. One of our successes is that there's a budget for innovation for meat alternatives. And that was unthinkable 10 years ago. Another success is that our lower house, our House of Representatives, have voted for our bill to end ritual slaughter without stunning.
It's still too soon to say if Marianne Thieme will be able to change things in the long term in the Netherlands. But she has inspired imitators. There are now 16 political parties for animals in the world. But entering the political arena isn't the only way to promote the animal cause. Switzerland has some of the tightest laws on animal protection. This was written into the Constitution as far back as 1973. It also stipulates, and is the only constitution in the world to do so, that animal dignity must be protected. This goes further than affirming that animals have feelings, and has very concrete consequences for Swiss animals and their owners. In pet stores, you cannot buy a single rat.
We sell them in pairs because they need social contact with other members of the same species. It's important for them. There are some animals that cannot tolerate being on their own. They can become depressed, they may stop eating, and actually die. People work all day and often they only take care of their animals in the morning and at night. So having a companion is important.
This obligation extends to all social species. Guinea pigs, gerbils, chinchillas, most rodents cannot be kept as single pets. Animals must also be able to satisfy their basic needs and must have hiding places and things to nibble. Swiss animal protection laws also forbid the separation of birds that live in pairs, such as budgerigars, which form relationships for life.
This means that animals are not just protected from pain, suffering and harm, they also have the right to be what they are.
Antoine Goetschel is a lawyer specializing in animal rights and ensures that all the laws regarding dignity are respected. Between 2007 and 2010, he even held a role in the canton of Zurich that is unique in the world, animal lawyer. During this period, when he was a few years younger and yet to sport a beard, Antoine Goetschel was paid by the canton to represent mistreated or abandoned animals in criminal cases. He handled almost 200 cases annually, while in other cantons, such cases could be counted on the fingers of one hand. But above all, he was like a thorn in the side of Swiss justice.
The police, the courts, the prosecutors are all much more involved. They realized that the laws on animal protection must be applied in the same way as we apply environmental or traffic laws. The question is no longer about whether or not to apply them. They are laws like any other.
Antoine Goetschel takes initiatives that ensure he is the darling of the media in Switzerland, but which also make him plenty of enemies. On this day, Antoine Goetschel faced off against some fishermen who had come to support one of their own. A fisherman who fought for 15 minutes to land an 11-kilo pike. Too much suffering for the pike's lawyer.
It's up to the judge to decide if it was cruel to the fish or not. Because if you did that to a dog or a cat or a cow, then of course it would be cruel. Now it's up to the judge.
The judge did not wish to establish whether or not there had been cruelty towards the pike. The fishermen were relieved.
Sie wissen, wir sind zufrieden, einmal vorerst. Für kurze Zeit. Die nächsten 2 Jahre, bis wir den Lausanne Bericht haben, wahrscheinlich.
Aber er hat eine Ohrfeige bekommen.
Antoine Getchell lost that case, and not long after, a referendum against the animal lawyer brought his job to an end. But his work was not in vain. Animal protection is taken increasingly seriously in Switzerland. Elsewhere, it's taking a long time for animal rights legislation to be adopted. But by mobilizing public opinion, organizations hope to gradually make some progress. In August 2014, in front of the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, PETA, the animal rights organization, tried to raise awareness of passers-by to the plight of wild animals in circuses. They want German law to make their use illegal. The association denounces the condition in which animals are kept. Cages of just a few square meters where big cats, for example, are unable to satisfy their physiological need for open spaces. These animals end up with behavioral problems. And there is nothing uniform or rational about European legislation governing this issue. Some countries forbid such conditions for animals born in their natural environment. Others just for certain species. Some have a ban for all wild animals, and some forbid this for all animals of any species. In France and Germany, there is currently no national legislation with regard to circus animals. What is the basis for legislation with regard to establishing a boundary between what is authorized and what is forbidden? This question is posed under every big top. Bernard Paul is the director of the Roncalli Circus. For 10 years, he ran a big cat number before discontinuing it. This remains an exception in the circus world.
I decided to stop working with wild animals. I think that's the way to go, simply because it's crazy to travel back and forth across Germany with lions and tigers. A giraffe that lives in Africa has a territory covering several hundred kilometers with huge trees. A giraffe in a zoo, in an enclosure, that's wrong. But by saying that, I'll no doubt be attracting the wrath of the other circuses.
But the Roncalli Circus continues to use domestic animals like horses. And when PETA recommends people to boycott circuses with animals, Bernard Paul sees red.
They print posters that say all circuses are cruel to animals. That's like saying all foreigners are criminals. I know lots of people who love their animals more than anything else, and who select those that can be trained. There are domestic animals and wild animals. Okay, but humans have lived with animals for millennia.
So what is the answer? Must we give up the emotions that an animal can inspire in us and simply make do with substitutes? Should the boundary marked out by the law distinguish between categories of animal, or is it more complicated than that?
The question is not about animals that are bred or wild ones. It's whether there are animals that seem happy to work with people, and not just with all people, but with good trainers. And there are some animals that are clearly deeply unhappy. But you can immediately see that this distinction doesn't follow a line that separates animals born in captivity and wild animals. It's about much more concrete, more individual boundaries.
What if the way to answer this question was by granting each animal with their own individual rights? Not passive protection rights, but fundamental individual rights like those human beings have with our own human rights and rights as citizens. For now, the judicial system establishes a distinction between objects and people who alone have rights. Animals are not people, so they don't have these fundamental rights. But what if their category were changed, at least for some of them? This is the slightly crazy gamble taken by Steve Wise.
There's a wall in which, right now, all non-human animals are things and all humans are persons. And that's a fundamental distinction in law. It's the same distinction as between a slave and a master. And so right now, if you go in front of a judge, all they're doing is looking at the species and saying the only species that we're going to allow personhood to is human beings. We think that that line is arbitrary, and that what we're now trying to do is break through that wall with any species.
In an attempt to break down this wall, Steve Wise has taken one species, chimpanzees. They have been sufficiently studied to scientifically prove they have the capacity for autonomy and self-determination. And these are the human qualities protected by habeas corpus, that legal principle that covers a fundamental freedom, that we may not be imprisoned without trial. Steve Wise is therefore trying to extend this right to freedom to the chimpanzee. Wise has filed requests for habeas corpus in the name of 4 chimps being kept in shameful conditions. From first requests to appeals, Steve Wise and his association, the Non-Human Rights Project, have fought for 2 years to the fascination of American media.
Chimpanzees are autonomous and self-determining beings. New York common law supremely values autonomy and self-determination, and any human who is autonomous would clearly be allowed to get a writ of habeas corpus but not be imprisoned against her will.
Until now, no judge has agreed to grant the status of a person to a chimp. But there has been massive media interest in the trial, and Steve Wise has been able to explain his theory in the courts.
The only way that humans' fundamental interests are protected is if they are protected by fundamental rights. And that's the exact same thing for a non-human animal. The only way that a non-human animal's fundamental interests will be protected is if she has fundamental rights.
Steve Wise's method has set a precedent. In 2014, Sandra, a 20-year-old female orangutan in Buenos Aires Zoo, obtained what the chimps had been refused, habeas corpus. Argentinian justice considered that Sandra had feelings, that she was a non-human person, and was being illegally deprived of her freedom. Since then, her living conditions at the zoo have been improved. But it is impossible to release Sandra back into the wild, as she is too old and has only ever lived in captivity. A nature reserve would have to take her in. The animal rights strategy has its limits and isn't always met with unanimity.
Of course, these rights will be attributed to certain animals, those we call legally elected animals, such as chimpanzees, maybe dolphins, and a few other particularly charismatic animals. Then what will happen? The boundary that we had between humans and animals will not be questioned at all. On the contrary, I think it will be strengthened. And that's where the problem will be, because in the end, that boundary will be withdrawn for a few. And then will be even more unfair, because it's sure that chimpanzees will end up with rights, whatever rights they may be, but there'll be no rights for rats, few rights for pigs. And where will it end?
There is no clear answer to the question of this boundary. What are the criteria for granting or not granting rights? And moreover, is this demand for rights for animals actually a realistic proposition?
Debating the issue of rights is a good thing. To encourage us to consider some of society's problems, it's necessary to defend extreme positions. In general, society then takes the center ground. But if there were no extreme propositions, nobody would ever wake up.
A wake-up call that's even more necessary because our animal friends need their better conditions now more than ever. Recourse to legislation is one path among many towards achieving this. But the law alone cannot respond to a key question. In the future, what place in our society are we prepared to grant animals?